And today, we're going to expose the scientific process that separates sustainable success from, well, spectacular but entirely preventable failure.
Yeah, we're doing a deep dive into the methodology known as the lean startup.
It feels like necessary work because the popular story we all hear about success,
Yeah.
it feels almost actively harmful.
It is. When you read the business press, the entrepreneur is always this heroic visionary, right? Someone fueled by, relentless determination, a stroke of brilliance, and just perfect timing.
The myth is that it's all about having the right idea and the willpower to just force it into existence.
Right, and that story makes failure seem like a moral shortcoming. Like
Yeah.
you just didn't have enough conviction, or you were just unlucky.
But if you actually look at the cold, hard data, the vast majority of startups fail. Most new products, even from big established companies, just fall flat.
And that failure usually isn't about a lack of genius or passion. It's almost always a failure of process.
That's the key distinction, isn't it? We spend all this energy looking for the secret ingredient in the product, the killer feature, the revolutionary tech.
When the secret is actually in the system you use to validate the idea in the first place, that whole brilliance and grit mantra, it stops us from using a repeatable scientific approach.
It gives you a convenient excuse. We didn't have the right stuff.
Exactly. Instead of forcing you to admit our method for figuring out what to build was fundamentally broken.
And to really get why this methodology matters, you have to look at its origins. It came from a really painful personal failure. We have the story of the co-founder's first venture, right as the dot-com bubble was just collapsing.
Yeah, that must have been brutal. And it was deeply formative. The specific memory he shared was standing in the street with his co-founder. It was raining, they were arguing, completely out of money,
Wow.
and they couldn't even agree on which direction to walk. That image, lost, soaked, and just fundamentally without direction, it perfectly symbolized their failing company.
What was the idea?
The idea was actually pretty promising. They were building online profiles for college students to share with potential employers. They really thought they had a great product insight.
But they were committing the gravest sin of all, weren't they? They were building something incredibly complex that was based entirely on.
Untested assumptions. Precisely. They were doomed because they had no scientific methodology to turn that insight into a real company. They were just wasting time, money, emotional energy on a massive scale. They were confusing activity with progress,
Just building, building, building.
without ever stopping to figure out if anyone actually cared.
So our mission today is to give you the framework, the scientific process, that replaces all of that expensive guesswork with what's called validated learning and rigorous experimentation. This is really the operating manual for innovation.
That's right. We're going to detail a systematic approach that can be learned, it can be replicated, and you can apply it whether you're in a garage or a Fortune 500 boardroom. And the whole methodology rests on 5 foundational principles that we're going to unpack.
Okay, where are they?
First, this core belief that entrepreneurs are everywhere. You don't need a garage or venture capital. You just need to be managing a business under conditions of, extreme uncertainty.
Okay, so it's a mindset, not a job title.
Exactly. Second, the definition that entrepreneurship is management, but a very specific type of management geared toward dealing with that uncertainty.
Right.
Third is the concept of validated learning. This is where scientific testing becomes the only real unit of progress. Not lines of code, not feature shipped, learning.
And that leads to the fourth, which is probably the most famous part.
The build, measure, learn loop. This is the engine, the mechanism for accelerating that feedback process.
And finally, number 5.
Innovation accounting, which gives us a new way to measure our progress and hold innovators accountable, focusing on metrics that drive action, not just vanity.
All right, let's dive in. Okay, let's unpack this and start
Yeah.
at the very core, that philosophical shift. If entrepreneurship is a management discipline, then the fundamental purpose of a startup has to be completely redefined.
It does.
We have to ditch the idea that we're just here to build cool stuff.
Exactly. The real job of a startup, fundamentally, is not to make stuff or even to make money, not at first. It is to learn how to build a sustainable business. That is the job.
And because you're operating under, as you said, profound uncertainty, this learning has to be rigorous. It has to be scientific.
And validated. You need empirical proof that you're actually moving toward a viable model.
This concept is the antidote to what the sources called achieving failure, that phrase. It sounds like a contradiction. How can a team successfully execute a plan that ends in total failure?
Oh, it happens all the time, especially in corporate innovation. Achieving failure is when you successfully execute a flawlessly planned operation that turns out to be utterly meaningless to customers.
Wasting millions of dollars in the process.
Millions. Think of a big company that spends 2 years planning this huge, splashy launch of a new social product. Their forecast projects millions of customers. They execute the marketing plan perfectly. They invest a ton in scaling their infrastructure. They hire support teams. They hit every single internal milestone on time and under budget.
By any traditional management standard, that sounds like a massive success.
It was a success until the day the product launched and the customers, they just didn't show up. They achieved perfection in execution, but the underlying business hypothesis was totally flawed.
They successfully and rigorously executed a meaningless plan.
And validated learning prevents this, because it forces you to test the hypothesis before you invest all that time and money in scaling the execution.
So validated learning is that rigorous empirical process that lets an entrepreneur break down the entire business model into its component parts, these leap of faith assumptions, and test each one systematically with real customers.
And that leads us directly to the engine of the whole methodology, the build, measure, learn feedback loop.
The BML loop.
The BML loop is the fundamental activity of a startup. It's designed purely to accelerate learning. So one, you build the minimum version of your idea, the product artifact that allows for testing. And the key here is speed.
Get something out there fast.
As fast as humanly possible. Two, you measure how real customers respond to it using actionable metrics, which we'll get into.
And then three, you learn.
You learn from that data. And that culminates in the most critical decision an entrepreneur makes. Do we pivot, meaning change our core strategy, or do we persevere and keep optimizing?
The entire goal is just to get around this loop as many times as you can, as fast as you can.
Over and over and over again until you have validated all your core hypotheses.
Okay, but this emphasis on constant change and acceleration, it seems like it could just descend into chaos. If we're constantly building and testing, how do we keep the whole thing from falling apart?
That's where the hierarchy of commitments provides stability. You can visualize it as a pyramid. At the very base, the foundation is the vision.
The big picture.
The ultimate goal, the reason the startup exists. For instance, to make personal finance accessible to everyone. This almost never changes. It's the destination on the map.
That makes sense. Your destination stays the same even if the roads change or there's a detour.
Exactly. So above the vision is the strategy. This is your specific business model, the product roadmap, the target market you believe will get you to that vision.
And this can change.
It can. When the data proves your strategy is wrong, you need a pivot. That's a structured, major course correction. Strategies change less frequently than products, but way more frequently than the vision.
And then right at the top of the pyramid is the product itself, the features, the code, the design.
And that's where most of the daily activity happens. We're constantly working on optimization, fixing bugs, improving conversion rates, adding small features. We call that tuning the engine. Products change constantly, sometimes daily or even hourly.
So the hierarchy tells you the gravity of the change you're making. You know, if you're just tweaking something or if you're making a full strategic overhaul.
Precisely. And there's a great automobile metaphor that contrasts those two levels of change. The engine tuning versus the strategic steering.
Okay, lay it on me.
Think about driving a high-performance car. You've got two different but totally necessary feedback loops happening at the same time. The first loop is deep inside the engine, the timing of the fuel injection, the spark plugs, all those tiny explosions. That short, rapid loop, that's optimization.
You're just making the engine run as efficiently as possible.
Right. You're tuning it for peak performance. But tuning the engine only makes you go faster on the road you're already on. It doesn't tell you if you're driving straight towards a cliff.
Right. That's a big problem.
It's a huge problem. And that's where the second loop comes in. The relationship between the driver and the steering wheel. This is the strategic layer. If you realize your destination is actually west, but you're heading east, or you see a roadblock, you grab the wheel and you change direction immediately.
And that steering, that's the pivot.
That's the pivot. Both systems need feedback, but the steering feedback is what ensures you get to the ultimate destination that's defined by your vision. You need the engine to run efficiently, but you need the driver to determine the course.
So the goal isn't just to build efficiently, but to make sure that what we build is actually driving us toward the vision. This has to completely redefine what productivity means for a startup team.
It fundamentally shifts the measure of productivity. I mean, in traditional manufacturing, the more high-quality widgets you produce per hour, the more productive you are. Simple.
But for a startup, that's useless.
Utterly useless. You can produce a million perfect, high-quality widgets that absolutely nobody wants. You've been extremely busy, extremely efficient, but you've accomplished nothing of value.
So the real measure of productivity becomes the acquisition of validated learning.
Yes. The goal is to find the right thing to build, the features customers actually want and will pay for as quickly as you possibly can. Anything that doesn't contribute directly to that learning is, by definition, waste.
That focus on speed and eliminating waste brings us right to the build phase. The lean startup approach demands that you turn ideas into testable artifacts, and sometimes shockingly simple artifacts. This is where the minimum viable product, the MVP, takes center stage.
And the MVP is, without a doubt, the most frequently abused and misunderstood term in modern business.
How so? What do people get wrong?
So many people think the MVP is just the smallest, crappiest product they can build before they run out of money. That is completely wrong.
Okay, so what's the correct definition?
A minimum viable product is specifically the version of the product that enables a full turn of the build, measure, learn loop with the absolute minimum effort and development time.
So it's not about features, it's about learning.
It is defined entirely by its ability to generate validated learning. The goal is to start the learning process immediately, not to finish the development process.
And you're not necessarily building this for the mass market right out of the gate. The MVP is designed for a very specific group of people.
Yes, for early adopters. And they are so crucial. Early adopters are visionary customers. They're the ones who accept and often enthusiastically embrace an 80% solution.
They can see the potential?
They use their imagination to fill in the missing features because they understand the core vision and they want their problem solved now. They are willing to put up with inconvenience, with bugs, to be the first.
And targeting them first means you don't need all the expensive polish and marketing that you might need later.
Exactly. You don't need features that might prove to be totally irrelevant. They give you that crucial, honest, initial feedback.
This is where the stories get really interesting, because the gap between some of these early MVPs and the final multi-billion-dollar companies is just shocking. Let's talk about Groupon.
Ah, yes. The irony is so rich with Groupon. It became one of the fastest companies in history to hit a billion-dollar valuation. It pioneered this whole social commerce space.
But the founder, Andrew Mason, was pivoting from a failed concept, right? Activism platform called The Point.
He was. And he needed to validate the new concept of group coupons immediately. He had no time, no money.
So how does a company with zero infrastructure, zero automation, start testing a grand concept like that? Surely their first product wasn't a complex e-commerce platform.
Not even close. It was, in Mason's own words, totally ghetto. The MVP was a simple WordPress blog.
A blog.
A blog. They crudely skinned it to look like a deal of the day site, and they started by selling something super basic. T-shirts. When customers bought them, the description would just say, red size large.
What if you wanted a different size?
You had to email the request in manually.
So someone was sitting there reading emails just to process variations on T-shirts. That is the definition of non-scalable.
It was completely non-scalable, but that was the entire point. The learning process was what mattered, not the efficiency.
Okay, so what happened when they started selling actual deals like sushi coupons?
The fulfillment was manual too. They generated the coupon PDFs using a simple FileMaker script, and then they sent them out individually using Apple Mail.
Wait, so if they sold 500 deals in a day, someone was literally sitting there clicking send on their email client 500 times.
That is the magic. The inefficiency in execution was a necessary trade-off for the speed of learning. The sheer waste of human effort in manually sending those emails was infinitesimal compared to the cost they would have incurred building a complex, automated platform for a business model that might have been totally flawed.
They validated the market demand first.
Before writing a single line of scaling code.
Okay, let's look at some other specific MVP techniques. The video MVP used by Dropbox is a masterclass in this.
Yeah, the Dropbox team knew their product was a huge technical challenge. Getting seamless file sync to work across multiple operating systems, Windows, Mac, mobile, is incredibly difficult to do well.
And the problem was that seamless file sync, when it's done right, feels like magic. But people don't know they need that magic until they see it.
Right, and their big leap of faith assumption was that if the software just worked like magic, customers would rush to adopt it, even though similar clunky products had failed before.
And they couldn't build the actual working software quickly.
No, it would take years of back-end work. So they validated the demand with a simple video MVP. Drew Houston created this 3-minute narrated video that just demonstrated the intended user experience.
And critically, he tailored it to the audience.
He did. He put in specific, targeted in-jokes and references for the early tech adopters who were all over sites like Big at the time.
And the result was immediate.
It was massive validation. Their beta waiting list exploded from 5,000 people to 75,000 people literally overnight. That simple, cheap video proved the market demand. It validated their crucial leap of faith assumption before they spent years bogged down in difficult technical development. They learned they should persevere.
Okay, now let's move from video to this extreme, high-touch customer service model, the Concierge MVP. Food on the table, or FOTI.
FOTI's service was designed to match recipes with local grocery sales. Eventually, it would need massive databases, complex algorithms.
But they started with nothing.
Absolutely nothing. The early days of FOTI are the perfect example of maximizing learning through manual intervention. The CEO and the VP of product served their very first customer without any software, no databases, not even an automated website.
So how did they deliver the service?
They personally went to the customer's preferred grocery store each week. They manually reviewed the weekly sales flyer, manually selected recipes based on her known preferences, physically prepared a customized shopping list and recipe packet.
And delivered it in person.
Delivered it to her in person, collected her $9.95 check, and all the while they were soliciting detailed feedback.
That sounds like a spectacularly inefficient, bespoke personal assistant service, not a tech company.
By traditional metrics, yes, it was the definition of waste. But through the lean startup lens, they were maximizing validated learning. They were figuring out, one customer at a time, exactly what the value proposition was, what people would pay for, the friction points, all before writing a single line of scaling code.
They only started automating when they were forced to.
At the exact point when they were too busy serving manual customers to bring on new ones, they built the automation only after they had empirical proof of value.
That's brilliant. You're testing demand before you invest in the supply chain. Now, the flip side of that is the Wizard of Oz MVP, where the customer thinks they're using advanced tech, but
It's just humans behind the curtain. And the Aardvark story is the classic example here.
what was their vision?
Aardvark wanted to build a virtual personal assistant that could answer subjective questions. Things like, where's the best place to get Ethiopian food near me? Or, what should I read next?
Things Google can't easily answer.
Right. They knew the final solution would need complex, expensive AI. So they wisely spent 6 months testing 6 different product concepts before settling on the format that worked. An instant messaging Q&A service.
So they refused to build the expensive AI until they proved people actually liked the concept.
They deliberately faked it. The successful product they launched was supposed to have a complex algorithm to route questions to the best person in your social network to answer. But in the beginning, 8 employees just manually managed the queries.
So customers thought they were talking to a smart system.
And they were really talking to one of 8 people in an office using internal chat tools. This Wizard of Oz approach proved that people would use the product and get immense value from it, validating the whole business hypothesis long before the costly AI was ever built.
Okay, so the MVP is all about learning before committing resources. But this leads to the inevitable question about quality. If we're rushing to ship the most minimal product possible, how do we maintain any professional standards?
That is the quality quandary, and it's a huge cultural challenge for most teams. You have to accept a difficult truth. In a startup, if you don't know who your customer is or what they value, you do not know what quality is.
That's a tough pill to swallow for a professional engineer or designer.
It is. The traditional notion that professionals must ship perfectly polished products can actually blind you to what customers really value. We have to be willing to set aside our professional pride in service of validated learning.
And the IMVU Avatar story illustrates this perfectly. The engineers were aiming for this high-fidelity 3D movement.
Yes, the IMVU founders, many came from the video game world, so they instinctively knew that 3D avatars should move fluidly, walk around, avoid obstacles like in The Sims. But that tech was complex and time-consuming.
So for their MVP,
They shipped stationary avatars, and when customers complained, they quickly implemented a hack. When you clicked a new spot, your avatar would instantly teleport there. No walking animation, just a sudden jump.
I can just imagine how the engineers felt shipping that, like it was amateurish.
They did. They felt embarrassed, like they were delivering a substandard product. But here's the critical lesson. When IMVU surveyed its customers, They consistently listed avatar teleportation as a favorite feature.
Wait, really?
They even sometimes described it as being more advanced than The Sims.
So the engineers thought it was a lame hack, but the customers thought it was a cool, advanced feature.
It completely inverts the engineering priority list. It proves that our internal assumptions about quality are often dead wrong until they're validated. That hack performed better than the expensive traditional feature would have.
So the rule is simple. Only tolerate quality problems that get in the way of learning.
Exactly. Any other lack of polish is acceptable if it helps you accelerate the loop.
So we've learned how to quickly build an MVP and get that raw data. Now we move into the measure phase, and this is where accountability really kicks in through something called innovation accounting.
Right, but before we get there, we need to talk about the danger this whole process is designed to overcome, the land of the living dead.
That sounds ominous.
It's startup purgatory. It's a tragic place where teams can linger indefinitely. It happens when a company has achieved just enough success, a handful of customers, a trickle of revenue to keep the lights on, but not enough to meet the expectations of the founders or investors.
So you're not dead, but you're not really alive either.
Exactly. And resources are slowly drained. Employee loyalty encourages the team to just keep persevering, believing that true success is just one more feature away.
It's the ultimate waste of human potential. All those resources could have been pivoted into a successful idea.
And innovation accounting is the systematic antidote designed to combat that delusion. Traditional accounting P&L statements, cash flow, that's great for established companies focused on execution, but innovation accounting is designed for startups in extreme uncertainty.
Its purpose is to measure progress using validated learning as the currency.
And to set quantifiable learning milestones and help prioritize work.
So the first step has to be establishing a baseline. You can't navigate if you don't know where you're starting from.
You have to ruthlessly confront the truth. The MVP, or even a smoke test like a fake pre-order page, lets a startup immediately fill in real baseline data for their growth model. What are the conversion rates, sign-up rates, retention?
You need to measure these core leap of faith assumptions even if the initial numbers are just horrifyingly low.
Because that foundation of empirical data is the prerequisite for all future learning.
Okay, so you have the baseline. The next hurdle is recognizing the difference between metrics that just inflate your ego and the ones that actually inform your decisions. This is the battle against vanity metrics.
Vanity metrics are toxic. They're so toxic because they feel good, but they lead to inaction. They're numbers that inflate the ego but don't inform future decisions or show any cause and effect.
Like what? Give me some examples.
Total website hits, cumulative registered users, total questions answered. They create what we call success theater, this feeling of forward momentum, even when the company is failing to acquire and retain new customers.
And the test prep company, Grokkit, fell into this trap at first.
They did. They were focused on these big, gross usage numbers.
So what's an actionable metric, and how do they make that shift?
An actionable metric shows clear cause and effect. Grokkit shifted its focus entirely to cohort analysis.
Okay, break that down.
Instead of tracking the total number of users, a figure that can be manipulated by a one-time marketing spend or something, they tracked groups of customers or cohorts who signed up during the same specific time period, say the first week of March.
So cohort A, who signed up in March, is tracked completely separately from cohort B, who signed up in April after a big product redesign.
That's the power of it. Each cohort is an independent experiment. It's a report card on the viability of your business model at that specific moment in time.
So if the new group, cohort B, retains customers at the same miserable rate as cohort A, you know your big redesign was a failure.
A complete failure in terms of business impact, yes, no matter how much work went into it.
And that's what forced IMVU to seek genuine understanding, wasn't it? They were shipping improvements constantly, but the data was screaming at them.
That's right. IMVU was shipping code daily, doing all this traditional optimization, but their funnel metrics, the percentage of new customers who converted, retained, or bought something, remained stubbornly flat across new cohorts for months on end.
That must have been demoralizing.
It was a hard quantitative failure, but it was the necessary motivation to stop optimizing and start learning. The numbers were telling them, stop working because you are improving something that is fundamentally irrelevant to your customers' behavior.
And actionable metrics thrive on controlled experiments. This brings us to the power of split testing, or A/B testing.
And this moves testing out of just the marketing department and into the core of product development itself.
How does it work?
Split testing is offering 2 or more different versions of a product or a feature or a design simultaneously to comparable groups of customers and just measuring the difference in their behavior. It eliminates all the ambiguity of historical trends.
And Grokkit used this to test something that was considered an unassailable industry best practice.
They did. They decided to test lazy registration.
Which is the idea that you should let customers start using the service, experience the benefit, before you ask them to sign up.
The assumption was that early usage would hook them, and that would drive up sign-up and retention rates. So Grokkit tested this lazy model against immediate registration, where customers had to sign up based only on the marketing copy before they could start their study session.
And they expected the lazy registration group to just crush the other one.
They did. But the finding was shocking.
What happened?
The registration, activation, and retention rates were identical between the two groups.
No way.
Identical. All the significant technical effort required to maintain that lazy registration system was a complete and total waste. But more importantly, the test invalidated a core assumption about their business.
Which was?
Since the group that used the product first behaved identically to the group that registered based only on the marketing copy, it proved that customers were making their decision based on Grokkit's positioning and marketing message, not on their early product experience.
Wow. That discovery must have redirected their entire focus.
It did. They shifted from feature development toward messaging and acquisition. That is the definition of validated learning, a single test that informs your entire strategic direction.
So all good metrics, no matter what the test is, have to adhere to what you call the 3 A's.
Yes. The first is actionable. We've established this. They have to demonstrate clear cause and effect. If we change feature X, did user behavior Y change?
Second is accessible.
Right. Metrics have to be presented in simple, concrete units that everyone in the organization understands. You need to visualize the data. People visiting the website is way better than total hits, and the reports have to be widely distributed. Grokkit emailed daily reports on every split test to every single employee.
It democratizes the data. It settles arguments with evidence, not seniority.
Exactly. And finally, auditable.
Why is trust in the data so critical?
Because when a team's pet project is definitively killed by the data, their first natural reaction is to challenge the numbers. You need systems that let people spot check the data by actually talking to real customers, confirming if the reports match reality. If employees lose confidence in the data, morale just collapses and the whole scientific discipline is lost.
Okay, so we've established the foundation, we've built the MVP, and we've rigorously measured the results using innovation accounting. Now we arrive at the hardest part, the most difficult decision in the entire process, the learn phase. This is where leadership has to decide whether to pivot or persevere.
And it is so challenging because it flies in the face of human psychology, especially the sunk cost
Let's
fallacy.
explain that.
Perseverance feels heroic. It's what we're taught to do. Pivoting often feels like admitting failure, like you're abandoning this deeply personal, complex thing you've invested everything in.
So a pivot is the ultimate test of a leader's humility and discipline.
It is. And a pivot isn't random panic. It's a structured course correction designed to test a new fundamental hypothesis about the product, the strategy, and the engine of growth.
Let's walk through the Vodafone case study. It's a perfect example of using innovation accounting to systematically guide this pivot journey, even when the initial efforts showed some signs of success.
Right. So Vodafone wanted to be a social network for verified waiters, focused on civic participation. The founder, David, his initial MVP took 3 months and cost about $1,200. And the baseline data was terrible.
How bad?
Only 5% of visitors registered, and of those, only 17% ever activated or used the site in a meaningful way.
So clearly the product needed some optimization right away.
Correct. So David focused intensely on optimizing the user experience. He spent $5,000 in 2 months boosting the metrics. And he succeeded. He got registration up to 17% and activation up to a fantastic 90%.
That feels like a huge internal victory, so why didn't he just persevere at that point?
Because the next 2 key metrics in his growth model were still miserably low. Retention was at 5% and referral was at 4%.
So people would sign up, use it once, and then never come back or tell their friends.
Exactly. The optimization proved the product could be used, but not that it could be sustained or grown virally. He was staring straight into the abyss of the land of the living dead. The product worked, but the business model was broken.
So what did the feedback, the qualitative and quantitative data suggest he should do next?
Customers loved one specific part, the voter verification feature. They said things like, the fact that you prove I'm a voter matters, but they found the full social network empty and useless. There's no one here to interact with.
So that led to the first pivot.
Pivot number one, the zoom in pivot. David drastically changed the strategy. He threw out the whole social network concept and focused solely on that voter contact verification feature as the entire product.
And then he tried to monetize that feature with a paid engine of growth, expecting activist groups to pay to use it.
Right. And the metrics for usage were better registration shot up to 42%, referral hit 54%, which proved the zoom-in pivot was strategically sound. People wanted that feature. The monetization hypothesis failed. Less than 1% of the activists were willing to pay the price he needed. He validated the product's value, but he invalidated the assumption that activists would pay enough to sustain the business.
So another pivot was needed.
He quickly moved to pivot number two. He tried a customer segment pivot. He shifted from individual consumers and small activists to large organizations and professional fundraisers, hoping for big, high-margin B2B sales.
That seems logical.
It does, but he signed letters of intent, he built the promised B2B functionality, but he ran into a massive hurdle. B2B clients are rarely early adopters. They stalled, they delayed, they demanded endless customization, and the long sales cycles just ate up his runway without delivering any real validated learning.
Another failure, another pivot required.
And the third and final pivot was driven by a need for a sustainable growth mechanism. He realized the only way to scale without a massive marketing budget was through a viral engine.
So what did he do?
He cut staff and he executed a platform pivot. He shifted from selling a bespoke application to building a self-serve platform inspired by Google's AdWords model. This was based on a viral engine of growth. It took only one more month to build.
And the results?
Immediate sustainable metrics. 51% sign-up, 64% referral, and crucially, 11% of customers were willing to pay 20 cents per message, which made the lifetime value of a customer sustainable.
What's incredible there is a difference in acceleration. His first major failure took 8 months of effort, but his final successful pivot took only 1 month.
That is the hallmark of validated learning at work. Even though he had to throw away a lot of code from the previous versions, those hard-won lessons about who his customers were and what they would actually pay for, they counteracted the technical waste. He was refuting new hypotheses faster and cheaper because he wasn't guessing anymore. He was building on quantitative knowledge.
So if pivoting is so necessary, why do most entrepreneurs wait until it's way too late?
There are three main psychological forces working against them. First, as we talked about, vanity metrics. They mask the need for change. They provide just enough feel-good data to rob you of the motivation to make the hard choice.
Second.
Having an unclear hypothesis. If you don't define upfront what success looks like, you can't experience complete, definitive failure. Any ambiguous result can be rationalized away, and you're just left guessing forever.
And the third, and this feels like the heaviest weight of all, sunk costs.
Absolutely. The more money, time, and critically, the creative energy you pour into an idea, the harder it is to abandon. Founders often wait until they are nearly bankrupt before they pivot, when they should be pivoting the moment they hit a quantitative point that proves the current strategy is failing.
Right. So let's quickly review the catalog of pivots because it shows a pivot is a structural change, not just a feature tweak. We mentioned the zoom-in pivot and the customer segment pivot. What are some others?
Well, there's the inverse, the zoom-out pivot, where the original whole product proves too narrow and becomes just one feature of a much larger product. And then there's the platform pivot, which Vodazon used successfully, changing from selling an application directly to being a platform that others can build on. The key point is that every pivot is a new strategic hypothesis that requires new MVP to test immediately. It is disciplined, systematic innovation.
We've really established that the lean startup methodology transforms innovation into this discipline management process built around rapid learning. But this begs the question, does this only apply to that initial garage founder phase? Or can large, established enterprises, the ones that rely on slow, structured processes, can they adapt this scientific approach?
It absolutely applies wherever there is extreme uncertainty. And believe me, large enterprises are desperately trying to solve for uncertainty whenever they launch a new product. This brings us right back to that first principle. Entrepreneurs are everywhere.
Right, whether you're a startup founder or an entrepreneur like Mark at a massive company.
You need a methodology to convert those raw, innovative materials into a breakthrough success. You have to manage innovation as something distinct from execution.
And Intuit, the financial software giant, is the classic example of a massive corporation embracing this shift. Scott Cook, the founder, effectively turned it into a 7,000-person lean startup.
Yeah, Intuit realized that despite being impeccably managed by traditional standards, way too many of their new product initiatives were failing. Their existing management paradigm, which was excellent at sustaining innovation, incremental improvements to existing products, was completely inadequate for disruptive innovation.
They were achieving failure on a massive, expensive scale.
A huge scale, so they had to restructure their deeply ingrained corporate culture and processes to become adaptive.
How do they do that? I mean, look at TurboTax. It's their flagship product. It operates under immense pressure during that short 2.5-month tax season.
And it historically had a very conservative culture. They might conceive of one major initiative per year. Scott Cook introduced fast cycle testing. Now, the TurboTax team runs over 500 experiments during that short tax season.
500.
Sometimes they're running 70 simultaneous tests per week. They can deploy a change on a Thursday, review the results on Monday, and launch new corrected tests by the following Thursday night.
That speed must have a profound cultural impact. Cook noted this in the sources.
It changes everything. Cook observed that when your system only allows for one major test a year, you create politicians inside your organization.
What does he mean by that?
People who have to spend all their energy just selling their one heavily polished idea internally, defending it against all challengers because their entire career depends on that one big bet succeeding.
But when you run 500 tests, you replace the politicians with entrepreneurs.
Exactly. When failure is cheap and fast and expected, you create entrepreneurs who are trained to run, learn, and retest based on data, not on internal lobbying. Intuit now measures its innovation success by two key metrics: the number of customers using products that didn't exist 3 years ago, and the percentage of revenue that comes from offerings that didn't exist 3 years ago.
They're managing innovation as a process that contributes directly to their growth.
That's right. And this concept of speeding up the feedback loop applies just as intensely to physical products and hardware through the counterintuitive idea of small batches.
This comes from the Toyota production system, right?
It does. In traditional lean manufacturing, small batches reduce inventory and maximize production efficiency. In the lean startup, the goal of small batches is to maximize learning speed.
And the SGW Dyneworks example is perfect here. They were tasked with developing a custom collapsible X-ray accessory for the military, a complex piece of hardware.
A traditional process for that would involve months of engineering design, tooling, then a big production run. SGW compressed that timeline dramatically. How?
They used 3D CAD software for virtual prototypes, but instead of ordering expensive permanent molds, they used CNC machining to create the first physical aluminum prototypes in just 3 days.
3 days.
The client immediately reviewed those prototypes, gave feedback on real-world use, and 2 full design iteration cycles were completed within the next 5 days.
So less than 2 weeks for real-world testing and 2 full design iterations on a complex military component. That's unheard of.
Yes, and the first production run of 40 units was delivered in 3.5 weeks total. If they'd followed a large batch approach, designing everything up front, a single flaw discovered 6 months in would have required tearing down the entire effort. This ensures they're building the right physical product.
Okay, but if you're going this fast, running 70 tests a week or building prototypes in 3 days, you are going to make mistakes. You need a mechanism to prevent those mistakes from getting worse.
And this is where the organization becomes truly adaptive. We have to introduce the essential tool of root cause analysis, the 5 whys.
It sounds simple. It is simple, but it's profoundly powerful. It's for continuous process improvement. When a mistake happens, instead of just fixing the symptom, you ask why 5 times, or as many times as it takes, until you identify the systemic root cause, which is often organizational, not personal.
It's hard to fail fearlessly if you're worried about getting blamed. How does this transform failure from a career-ending event into a learning moment? Let's use that IMVU training example.
It transforms failure into an objective study. At IMVU, a new product release disabled a feature for customers. So first question, why was the feature disabled? Answer, a particular server failed.
Okay, why number 2?
Why did the server fail? Answer, because an obscure subsystem was used in the wrong way. 3, why was it used in the wrong way? Answer, the engineer who used it didn't know how to use it properly.
Right.
Why didn't he know? Answer, he was never properly trained. And finally, 5, why was he never trained? Answer, because his manager didn't prioritize creating the necessary training program.
And the crucial insight here is that The solution isn't firing the engineer or just rebooting the server. The proportional investment in prevention has to be creating a functional ongoing training program.
Exactly. The root cause is always a failure of the system or the process, not an inherent failure of the person. You have to deliberately avoid what's called the curse of the five blames. It's human nature to point fingers when a mistake happens, but senior leadership has to consistently reinforce the mantra that chronic problems are caused by bad process, not bad people.
And what's the mantra for escaping that blame game? For creating that culture of fearless experimentation?
The mantra that should be repeated by the most senior people in the room is this: if a mistake happens, shame on us for making it so easy to make that mistake.
I love that.
At IMVU, they intentionally allowed new engineers to make a change to the production environment on their very first day. If the new hire broke production, the team would say, "Shame on us for making our production process so fragile," and then the new engineer was tasked with leading the effort to fix the process.
That transforms fear into ownership.
Completely.
Okay, one final piece. For large organizations that want to innovate without putting their core business at risk, how do they give these entrepreneurial teams the independence they need?
They must create an innovation sandbox. Senior management has to carve out a small, clearly defined area where these cross-functional startup teams are given total, independent authority to build, market, and deploy products without going through the traditional labyrinth of corporate approvals.
So the sandbox contains the risk, but it doesn't constrain the methods.
Exactly. Instead of hiding the innovation team away in some isolated skunkworks, you put it out in the open, but within boundaries. For a big online company, the sandbox might initially contain only the pricing page or be restricted to customers in one specific city. The customers are real, so you get validated learning.
But the parent company is protected because the revenue risk is contained.
And the startup team can iterate rapidly, fail cheaply, and report back using those transparent, auditable, actionable metrics. Once the innovation has demonstrated repeatable, validated success, you can gradually enlarge the scope of the sandbox and reintegrate it into the core business.
Hmm.
You know, as we've dissected this entire methodology, the central overarching idea, it becomes inescapable. The challenge of the 21st century is no longer a technical one.
Right.
Humanity's productive capacity, especially in the digital world, it vastly exceeds our ability to know what we should actually be building.
It's that shift from asking, can it be built, to asking, should it be built? Our future prosperity really rests on systematically validating what customers truly want and will sustain. The old system, relying on big plans and flawless execution, it just leads to monumental waste.
The biggest source of waste in the modern economy is the industrial-scale effort spent working diligently and efficiently on the wrong things. The lean startup provides the scientific rigor you need to transform that profound uncertainty into validated knowledge, reducing that colossal waste.
So as you integrate this deep dive into your own work, we want to leave you with a final thought. In the spirit of continuous innovation and challenging assumptions, look at the biggest, most fundamental professional decisions you are facing right now. Launching a new product, starting a new internal process, investing heavily in a strategy. How often are you making that bet based on a major leap of faith assumption without having run a single auditable experiment?
And the real challenge is this: how quickly and with what minimal effort could you design and test that assumption right now using an MVP or a split test to ensure you are building something that actually matters to the people you serve? The scientific journey toward radical success starts the moment you are willing to look at the data, no matter how small or uncomfortable that initial truth might be.